Welcome to the first episode of Stronger Than You Think podcast, a safe space for mental health conversations and all related topics. I'm your host, Erika Diaz-Castro, and I am founder of the podcast. I am a wife, a mom, an entrepreneur. I own CastroStrong LLC. Today's crew is super special. I am with Louie, Dr. Louie, a really good friend of mine, and he is an exercise physiologist.
Yeah, so I just completed my doctorate in exercise physiology.
How long ago?
Literally 2 weeks ago. It's so fresh. Yeah, so I was really fortunate because I did a lot of my research and work in exercise psychology. Mm-hmm. So before that, I became a licensed mental health counselor, and I have been a therapist for 4 years now. But I wanted to go back to school and learn about exercise and how fitness and exercise, how they relate with your mental health. So I did that.
And so today we're going to be talking about fitness as it relates to mental health, people who are dealing with stress, anxiety. We're not going to dive too deep into like diagnoses that are specific to, other more complex mental health struggles people are facing and overcoming, but we are going to be talking about how exercise and fitness overall play a role in therapies, lifestyle, adjusting, and living with mental health.
And then we're also thinking about ways that outlets and ways for support.
Yeah.
As well, and that's good stuff too.
So we'll provide some resources at the end. For now, I want to give Mark the opportunity to introduce himself and just give us a little more information about who he is, what he's doing, the kind of work he's completing, and what his intentions are going forward.
Wow. My mom is a clinical psychologist, which heavily influenced me growing up because she's an amazing person and amazing role model, but also because I think I learned early on in high school that when you talk about things, good things can happen, and you can kind of work through some of your stuff. And she was very transparent with me, and so reflecting back now on my journey and how I got here, she's a big influence of that because she introduced me to some basic counseling skills. And so an example would be, when I was young and I would get into a fight or something, or we got into an argument, we would have to sit on the couch and process it and talk about it. And she would be, and this didn't happen necessarily right after everything, obviously, but like later on, she'd be like, I need to talk to you. We got to talk. And I'm like, why do we need to talk? I don't want to talk. And, I had the attitude and everything. But eventually, I realized like how therapeutic that was because she would apologize sometimes.
Go mom.
I know. And I was like, what? I was right. And she would come back and then that made me apologize to her because I would, say things or do things that weren't, what I really wanted to do or say. And that in high school kind of also led to a lot of my friends. There was a lot of fights in high school, and I remember very vividly to one of my friends, like he wanted to fight somebody, and I was like, what is the problem? Like, just talk. Like, what is going on? Like, why are you mad?
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm so mad. Why are you mad? Like, what is it? And when he was able to kind of work, like, just tell me why he was mad. And it just, then you can let reason sort of talk, you could talk through it. But without that initial space, it's just pure reaction, or it's just, there was no room for that. So that sort of informed my, like, worldview going into college. And then in college, I knew that I didn't, I wanted to do some more, I realized that I also wanted to do some diversity work as well. So the importance of that. And I saw counseling as a way for you to kind of explore your diversity and explore sort of your own mental processes. So I went back to school, my master's degree, and my mom sort of actually helped me also kind of work through, what kind of career would be appropriate for that. So not necessarily a psychologist, but a counselor, because a counselor is someone who is a therapist that is there to facilitate a process and help you work through some issues or some life things that you're having. And versus a psychologist is more like research and applied, and it's very clinical. I went back to school for that, and then I knew as a therapist, I started working with people and helping people through my licensing. I mean, that was some really hard work, and it was tough. But I realized that it was good work. It was very rewarding and challenging at the same time. And at that time, I was also exercise training, and I was a trainer. And this is actually before I went to school. Sorry, I went back to school. But I was a trainer at Retro Fitness, and a lot of my clients were just sharing a lot of their experiences. And for me, that was like really, it made me realize like everyone can use a counselor or everyone can use a therapist, because there's just a lot going on for everyone. And so I put that in my application, and I remember that was something that really resonated with me. And then after that, after getting my master's, and I knew that there was a link between the two. I've always wanted to work with athletes as well in sports psychology, and learning a little bit more about how the body interacts with the mind and how we can self-regulate. I mean, that's what you were saying before, self-regulation in terms of knowing that you're about to go into some intense workout session, and what does that mean for your adversity outside of the gym, right? And so there's something there, and I was really fortunate to meet a professor who is doing that work, and he was doing it with addiction and smoking, but he wanted to know the effects of resistance training, weightlifting, for addiction and mental health. And there was a whole lab of people that were doing different research on it, research studies. So that kind of what my dissertation was on: exercise, the effects of resistance training on resilience. And it was looking at a sample of depressed Black men in particular. So it was very, very niche, but it was very interesting, because we know that there's something there, but to conceptualize it, theorize it, and sort of do it in a research empirical capacity is still something that hasn't really been done. And so we're still trying to figure that out. So that's a lot. But that's sort of where I'm at right now. I just got a position at Rutgers for a postdoc.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and I'm going to be working, thank you, I'm going to be working with their athletes.
That's awesome.
And doing sports psychology work. So, I think that ties up a lot of my interests back to, where I am today. And it's just a lot of interdisciplinary work. Just a lot of mental health work, exercise, sports, psychology, all that put together. And that kind of brings me here today.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Just to give a little bit of understanding, or provide a little bit more of an education about what the purpose of a PhD is. Essentially, you're asking a question, so you have to figure out what your question is, and then you have to figure out how to get the answers. And that's, like, in the most basic way, what you're doing.
Yeah, so I would say doctorate degrees, because there's different types. So there's PhD, there's Ed.D, there's Sci.D. Really what you're doing is you're taking, you're taking, like Erika said, a research question, and you want to test it. And it's for the purpose of seeing if there can be interventions in the future for a change. It's to sort of answer the question. So think about it as a scientist. Really, I think that's a great way to put it. A scientist. Scientist is someone who tests things, has a hypothesis, and what you're doing is, for your dissertation, basically is just you're gathering a lot of what's been done in your topic. Then you're talking about why you think something innovative and new is necessary. Then you test it, and then you write what you found, and then you also write what you think is important for the future. And so that whole process is a doctorate. Is intense, it allows you to sort of take a scientific approach to the work.
So what did you find? Like, what in working with this very specific population and presenting that question, what was your initial hypothesis, and what did the research and the studies and all of the information you gathered, what did it show?
So my findings showed that participants that were exercising and not exercising in this particular study design improved their resilience. So exercise was helpful, because we did see an increase in that group. There was another group that was not exercising, but their resilience also improved. And so resilience, we would define it as one's ability to bounce back, be able to withstand stress, and be able to grow from stress. The thing is sometimes with that sort of broad terminology, everyone's individual experience and how they sort of conceptualize resilience could be different. And so that was one of the challenges and limitations we had, and we used a scale that was validated for resilience. But what we found was that exercise seemed to help a lot, but so did other factors potentially, such as social engagement and such as having regular appointments and having somewhere to go. The study provided that for some people. So the future directions would be to continue to try to help build resilience by a multitude of things. So not just exercise alone, but maybe incorporate some sort of supportive aspect, maybe talk therapy with exercise, which is something that I'm interested in. I think it can be a future direction.
Thanks. So what is your opinion on individuals who are in the thick of depression, trying to figure out what direction to take? I mean, at that point, when you're in it, you don't want to think about how to get out of it. You don't really, as someone who has suffered from depression, you don't really have the mental capacity to try to problem solve in that space, right? So how do you recommend, or what did you see catapult that step? How do you get someone to get from being depressed to either making the appointment or getting to, just driving to a gym or going to a park or putting on your running shoes? Like, what is the process? What are you seeing?
So that's a great question. Thank you. When you're depressed, it's tough to do anything. It's tough to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And we ask our clients to come into a therapy session when they're depressed, and that's tough. So exercise is tough because it's also not necessarily pleasant while you're exercising, right? One thing that I saw in the study that I did with depressed men was that we incorporated sort of a value system. It was sort of what we call a behavior activation, and you try to find an anchor, a reason for why you want to exercise, something that's deeper than just sort of an external, appearance or, confidence. And confidence is big, right? But something like if you're working with an older person, for example, and they want to play with their grandkids, but they just can't because they don't have energy. So some sort of grounding anchor, and then problem solving and collaborating with them on how they can take small steps to exercise. So an example can be leaving your sneakers by the door. It can be as simple as, and it can be very tangible. It can be something that they can do at that moment. Maybe it's setting a reminder or signing up for a gym membership at that moment. So there's different small things we can do. Now, obviously, depression is multifaceted, meaning that some cognitive behavioral techniques are not always going to work very easily. So there is patience, persistence, and needing to also be very supportive and validating and patient. And so my opinion is that I think all that is important. And exercise is not easy. And you don't necessarily feel the benefits of exercise immediately. So if you can sort of understand that it is something that can enrich other areas of your life, sort of like a vitamin, something of that nature, where you're doing something like brushing your teeth or just sort of kind of you can incorporate it in that lens, it can have some profound benefits later in life.
So kind of identifying, aside from like the obvious benefits of exercise, you're moving your body, your blood is flowing through you, and you have a little bit more energy. Something else, like what else am I going to get out of this that really, aside from what it gives me to function physically, that will give me the confidence or the peace to do other things? So older people wanting to play with their grandkids. Say for me, I want to feel like I'm being true to myself while serving others, and I'm able to do that when I put my shoes on, get to the gym, and let the weights beat me up a little bit, because now my ego is like all the way down here, and when I'm done with everything, I'm like, wow, I overcame that session, and now I can go out into the world. I have these endorphins flowing through me, and I can give of myself to someone else, because I just poured into myself a little bit, even if it was hard, even if it was tiring, even if I didn't really want to do it when I started doing it. So.
And you gain mastery over it as well over time.
Over time, yeah.
Which is important. Mastery was something that we looked at as well. That in the study that I did was, if someone mastered exercise, did that little boost of confidence also help? And we didn't necessarily find anything significant there, but mastery is important for a lot of other psychological, measures or outcomes, such as anxiety, depression. When you feel that you can have mastery over something and have confidence over it, it can translate to other small victories in other areas that you can do something. So that resonated with me when you said that, mastery.
Mastery. How would you define mastery to the lay population?
Mastery is just you are confident in your ability to do a task.
Okay.
Because you've done it several times and you know you've sort of mastered it essentially. Okay. So exercise is tough, because when you start exercising, it's form, right? And especially resistance training, right? It's form, it's how much weight, how many reps, how often, and it's and then there's muscle soreness in the beginning, a lot of it, right? And fatigue, and it's just unpleasant. So at times, that's part that plays a role in it too, where once you master it, it sort of gives you a little bit of a boost to say, okay, actually I'm gonna do, my deadlift today, because I'm like, my form is bomb, and it's like, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
and it's like, and now the game shifted. It's not, can I go into the gym and do a deadlift? That's not the question anymore. The question is, how many, or what's my 1 rep max? And then changes. So that mastery piece is important. And for someone depressed trying to go to the gym, mastery can be tough to obtain, because part of the symptoms is that you don't feel that you're worth it, essentially, or you don't have the energy to desire to want to do it, and you might have the desire but just not the energy or sort of the ability to do so it's tough. So yeah, depression is challenging, but exercise over time can be extremely rewarding and supportive. I'm sure you have a lot of experiences.
I do. As a person who is working with people who want to lose weight or to get stronger, I see the very first thing I see really is what the struggle is. So this is why I feel I need help. So that's like the problem. And this is why I think you would be the person to help me. So it's like, all right, they're identifying my services or my knowledge as part of the resolution, so that they can get to a place where they feel more confident, more excited about whatever it is that they're trying to do. So when I'm presented with a problem, my thoughts initially are, okay, is this actually the problem? I think for me, I tend to question whether or not what is being given to me, is that actually what it is, or is it something more? Do I have to have another conversation? Is it going to be something that I discover over time? And is this really the answer to the problem? You know what I mean? Because a lot of times we can only identify the resolution so successfully as we can understand what the problem is. So if you don't really know what your issue is, you don't really know what's going to fix the issue. So at a baseline level, I think it's very empowering for a person to be able to say, maybe it's this, let me try it. And just taking that step forward to, trial and error your way through this experience and see if the application of the lesson is actually what helps fix the problem. And that's super empowering. However, it can also be very discouraging if you find that that's not the answer to the problem. That's not what's going to fix it. Or maybe it's
not the answer immediately.
Right.
At that moment. It's not a quick fix.
And how many times do you talk to someone and they're saying, I need to lose 10 pounds. How quickly can I do it? How fast can I get in shape for vacation? How much time is it going to take for me to lose a couple pounds or to add a few pounds to my 1 rep max. And that is a mental thing, because if you struggle with being patient, if you struggle with persistence, if you find yourself feeling really discouraged when you're knocked down and not wanting to overcome and try again, then it is going to be a really hard exercise. Specifically, will be a difficult task to take on when you're trying to solve a more complex problem. So
what I'm hearing from you there is, are you asking the right questions?
Are you asking the right questions?
Right?
Yeah.
So instead of saying, you know, can I lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks or something like that? You know, the question is like, why do you want to lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks? Or what is in the way of you just, instead of forget about the 2 weeks, what's in the way of you just losing a pound a month? Or, you know, it's a different question, but it frames it differently. Have you ever experienced this like that?
I have. I would say I've worked with a lot of clients over the last year who are trying to lose weight, and they share with me that they have tried everything and nothing is working. And there's a lot, if you've tried everything, you know, there's a lot of things out there that will present as a fix to like a weight loss problem, right? But what I have found really is there's a lack of discipline sometimes. There are other things going on, and the person really is looking for more of an escape. They're thinking, maybe if I fix my physical appearance, my emotional well-being will change. So I have found, to kind of answer your question a little more concisely, that a lot of times what people are telling me they want to do, it's not actually what they want to do, it's what they think will help them feel better. And they're not actually telling me what the problem really is. It's like they have had a conversation with themselves about this already. I'm only coming in like kind of later at the tail end, and it's like, hey, I already figured out what my problem is. You're the answer. And it's like, okay, so if we're the answer, then you want to lose 10 pounds, do X, Y, and Z. And at the first check-in, they couldn't do X, Y, and Z because the real problems got in the way. You know?
So, you know, if there was a therapy to help someone just exercise, that would be important too. Just because exercise, adherence, just continuing to exercise is so challenging for people who are not depressed as well.
For people who are.
So it makes you think, you know, how much weight mental health has when you can't exercise. Working with your clients, have you found anything that? So for me, it would be collaborating with them, really trying to learn more about them, and really trying to, like you said, kind of get the story behind the initial ask, right? For you, how's that played out in terms of because you also don't want to impose what you think is going on, right? So how do you sort of navigate that?
So
it's been challenging.
Without drawing conclusions on my own and making, you know, inaccurate assumptions, I try to be as understanding, meaning I listen more without giving feedback on what I'm hearing, or I'll ask a little more of a detailed question. Maybe I'll probe a little more without getting into too many potentially complex issues. I tend to try to find the next layer without actually letting the person know I'm looking for the next layer. So
it's like a little digging.
I feel like it's more conversational digging. So if I can show you that you can trust me and talk to me, you're gonna tell me eventually what is going on, and then we can actually figure out what will help. And if I'm not the person to help you, I'll send you to maybe the direction of someone who I think will be able to help. But it takes time, and it takes vulnerability. Being vulnerable is really hard, and it's very exhausting.
It's very exhausting.
So that combination is not like what you're going to put on your invitation to come talk to me. Like, hey, this is going to be hard, this is going to be super tiring, but like, let's talk through some things. Just like when you're wrong or when you're getting in trouble with your parents or whatever. So when you're thinking about how to navigate a client relationship and get them to do hard things that are hard, whether you have mental health issues or not, I think giving a disclaimer like, hey, it's okay if you mess up, or it's okay if you missed the gym a couple days this week, or it's okay if you didn't eat all the food you were supposed to eat, or you ate more than what you were supposed to eat today. Just allowing someone to be okay with a small hiccup. Because as we kind of go through our day, we are like constantly telling ourselves like, hey, I have to do this, I have to do this. If you did this and you didn't do it the way that you wanted to, you're carrying that with you. And that's like, you know, that's something that you start to judge yourself for. So if you didn't go to the gym today or you overate, that moment of like
thinking, that thought process, moment, yeah,
it can extend longer than what really it deserves, you know. I
emotional resources is what I call it.
Do you? What is that? Tell
so
me.
Emotional, so you're just thinking about something, right? A conversation you didn't have maybe that you should have had, or like you're saying, you're upset that you didn't go to the gym that day, and then the rest of the day it plays out, and you're just realizing that you're using a lot of your emotional and mental space on it, and it's something that you could have released, something that could have been done. So that's what I mean by emotional resources.
Yeah, I think definitely that is exactly what it is. Like you don't have to give it so much thought, but you're choosing to because of the story you're telling yourself. And I don't think that every person's experience is that they're telling themselves a certain story, but I do think your thought life is influencing everything that happens after an experience. So if you're harping on it in your mind, that's obviously that experience will live for as long as you allow it to live. And a lot of times when you mess up, you could just be, you know,
you can
okay, I messed up, and that's it.
You can release it. And also the other thing that kind of what you said right now is that it can play out in different ways. Like all of a sudden you have an attitude with your partner, and it's like
it has nothing to do with them.
It has to do with what's going on with you, and then you're feeling a certain way about yourself. So that's, I guess, what you would also be projecting onto them. But yeah, that happens a lot, and I think about that also with an action, and I think about anxiety for this in particular. You know, when you're ruminating or you're worried about something. Two things: you may not be able to do anything in that moment to stop your worrying, right? If you're worried that you have a family member on a flight and you're worried about the flight status, like you have no control over that.
Right.
So you can tell yourself that and sort of allow yourself to release that. And then there's also the times where you do have control, right? I need to apply to this job, but I haven't taken the time to do it yet. Okay, so you can actually in that moment open up the application and start working on it. Maybe not finish it, but at least take an action that will sort of address that initial anxiety. This is a lot of self-regulation, being aware of like, okay, can I do something at that moment?
In your research, did you find any issues with the participants being aware of their thought life, of their like whatever circumstances they were facing or experiencing? Was there anything that addressed that, or
no? So a lot of there was nothing that addressed specific issues in their life.
Okay.
It was really testing the physiological, mostly mental effects of the resistance training. But as we know, in terms of just everything being sort of multifaceted, it's not always that simple, right? And so we didn't measure specific situations that people were going through emotionally, but we did know that they were all depressed at a clinical level. Okay. Not by a clinical diagnosis, but by the responses on a self-report measure, which is also a limitation to self-report measures. But so we knew that the sample was depressed, but we didn't necessarily know their specific stories, which is important to know. And so I think that's part of what future work should do is look at that and see if you can address that specifically.
As a person doing that work, how do you see patients coming from not being self-aware to being self-aware?
Well, I think it's it can be a switch. It could be an initial it's like a buy-in almost, right? Like it's a client can buy into what they're doing and really believe that it can be helpful, and then they have a breakthrough moment where you see something in their face switch, and you're like, okay, there's some growth here. And then, as a therapist, you can acknowledge that growth, or you can point it out and say, I noticed that, you didn't, curse when you mentioned A, B, C, and D person. Something small like that. And they, and that awareness reflection, that sort of feedback is so important, because sometimes you're not aware of your areas of growth. And so for me, I think that I've had rewarding experiences with clients that have had that moment, that breakthrough moment. And then also sometimes it comes at times when you least expect it. I had a client and we terminated because it was per our practicum, and so therapy had to end. And on the last day, she was always late to every session. The last day she was 20 minutes early. And it's like there's always different dynamics at play. So I think being patient and being empathic is important. And people get to their breakthroughs and their moments on their own time and accord.
Yeah. No matter what you do to help them.
You gotta be okay. Yeah, you gotta be okay with not always having a happy ending in therapy at that exact when you want it, basically.
Right. Yeah. It's not so linear.
It's not linear at all. I mean, you want it to be progressive, but it depends. Yeah, there's a lot of fluidity to it.
Yeah. So when talking about self-awareness, what I understood you to communicate is having that person just point out, like, hey, you used to do this, but now you're doing this. That's progress.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we see it with fitness as well.
Oh, that's a big part of what you do as a fitness professional, right?
Absolutely. I feel like there's an obvious progression when you're getting stronger, when you're getting leaner, when you are sleeping better and you're feeling good in your body. But there's something of an extra step you have to take to see the mental transformation. And sometimes the mental transformation is not something you can see for yourself because you're so focused on what it takes to get the physical to kind of be executed on. And I come in as the coach and I'm like, hey, prior to us working together, you were telling me before getting to the gym, you sit in your car for 20 minutes trying to convince yourself to get out. Now you're in the gym warming up within the first 5 minutes of you arriving.
Yeah.
That's a really big thing. Obviously you're more motivated. Obviously you are overcoming that initial feeling of maybe anxiety, maybe overwhelm, maybe stress about whatever. And having, even if it's not your coach or your therapist, like even just a friend telling you, like, hey, like, good job, I see you have a better attitude about X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
It goes a long way.
It goes a long way, yeah.
So when we're thinking about training and these men who were performing resistance training style workouts, how long were they training? What type of training were they doing? And how often, weekly, were they in the gym or wherever?
So they came in twice a week for 12 weeks.
Okay.
And the sessions were about an hour long, but there was about 40 minutes of training that took place in that hour. All the workouts were full body. Okay. And they incorporated free weights and some resistance bands as well. Okay. But the idea was to foster independence over time. So we wanted them to learn how to exercise so that they can implement it on their own with dumbbells at home, essentially. It was about a moderate intensity. Okay. And these are people who were sedentary, so they hadn't exercised prior, weightlifted prior. prior. So
wow.
it's bringing, or maybe several years, like 20 years, you know. So it was, we had to factor that in as well. But I guess in a more general application, if we were to sort of generalize it, I would say, I mean, and that's something is actually a good question for you. I mean, when you meet with a client, how do you figure out what's the most appropriate exercise prescription for their mental health? That's something that we still don't necessarily have a lot of research on. We just know that exercise is helpful at different intensities and different modalities. But what do you think in terms of that?
Well, that question brings me to think about my initial application. So when I have clients who are wanting to work with me and they're thinking about working with me in a training setting, or they're asking me to write them a program so they can implement it at the facility they train at, I want to know what they enjoy doing. I want to know how motivated they are to do what they're doing or what they think they want to do. If they've tried anything already, what the outcome was of that, how long they did it, what the setting looked like, who they were with, were they working out alone, were they with a group, and why they stopped and why they're coming to me. So
that's all great stuff, because it's like you want to tap into someone's, what do you like?
Yeah.
You want to tap into their desires, their wants, because you want it to be rewarding as much as possible, or you want to set them up for success as much as possible.
And you also want them to do something they're going to continue doing. If you hate golfing and you're being told to go golf, who really wants to drive all the way to wherever the golf course is or a range or whatever to do something you don't even enjoy doing?
Right.
Pay for a membership, pay for whatever, take time out of your day when you could be doing something else. And if we are honest with ourselves when we are asked those questions, I think the outcome is really, really positive, because you start to identify what you thought you wanted to do versus what you actually want to do. So an example would be a client of mine who I previously worked with. She wanted to do like fitness competitions. She's like, I really want to do a fitness competition. I know you have done one. I know you coach people who do them. I want to do that. It's a goal of mine. And one thing is to admire what people do, and another thing is to want to do what people do, because it's very different. I respect what you do. I don't want to do it.
Word.
No offense.
I feel you on that.
You know what I mean? I respect it. I think it takes a lot of discipline, hard work, brains, really, resources, time. There's a lot that goes into the stuff that we pour our passions and hearts into. And I respect that. But when it comes to actually doing what you're doing, or what I see you doing, and trying to take that on for myself, I'm a different person. I have different interests, and I also have different thresholds. And for competing specifically in like a physique transformation competition, whether it's bodybuilding or like a before and after thing, there's a level of sacrifice that is mandatory. It's obligatory. You know what I mean? Like, no matter what, you have to sacrifice time out of your day to train. You have to sacrifice time to prep your food, or money to buy, pay someone to prep your food. And there's a lot of doubt, because you don't know, if what you're doing is gonna work in the long term. There's a lot of assessment. Are we gonna, let's look at this, it's not working anymore. Exactly. Like, hey, it's been a couple weeks, I'm not losing weight, or hey, I've been doing this amount of running or whatever, and my legs still look the same. My mile time is not faster. What's going on? So it's one thing, like I said, to admire what someone's doing, but then to actually try to do it is different. And what I found with that client was she admired what bodybuilding competitions
looked like,
what competitors look like and whatnot. But when it came time to implement the protocol to get there, it wasn't fun. And it wasn't anything she ever did before. So it wasn't like, we unlocked this unknown passion. It was more like we unlocked this unknown dislike.
Yeah.
We didn't know that she didn't like it,
which is important
so she did.
too. You want to know what you don't like to kind of get closer to what you want.
Yeah.
Right. I feel you on. I thought about doing a physique or something like that, but then I was like, no.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And anyone that's done a dissertation knows you doubt yourself all the time. And there's a moment where you're like, you have a crisis where you're like, did I just waste 3 years of my life? Like, what am I doing? And it's very normal. It's actually been documented, which is good. So people in the future that want to pursue that work, you can look forward to that and very normal experience. Same thing with fitness, right? Bikini, physique. I'm sure there's moments where you're
in your head.
Yeah, your head. And mental health in those moments is challenging.
It is very challenging, and it's hard because it's like, I chose to do this,
right?
And now it's so hard, I can't even handle it.
You're living what you wanted, right? And you're doing it.
But why is it so hard?
Right. And why do you get anxiety? Why do you doubt yourself? And then so there's a lot of emotions attached to that. To these big goals. Yeah, to big goals, exactly. Anything that scares you is always going to challenge you. It's going to change you, and the goal is that it will contribute to a better life, to better quality of life, to joy. So why is the process taking away from that? Or at least that's the perception sometimes. Right. So thinking about that specific client, she loves running. So guess what she does? She runs. She runs miles and miles. Yeah, like, do what you enjoy doing. And if you don't know if you like something, try it out. And if you don't like it, don't keep doing it. Like, there's no rule in life that says that you have to do something for X amount of time in order for you to be a good person or a successful person or whatever. What I think is successful, or how I would measure success, is your ability to be honest with yourself, to be accountable, and to make adjustments or take action to change something that isn't working for you any longer, or at least not getting you closer to where you want to be. So when working with clients, that initial questionnaire is really important, because if I don't know what you're into, I'm not really sure how successful my program for you is going to be. And I don't even know if I can really help you. You know what I mean? And you want to know if you want to work with that client for yourself to kind of see, am I someone who can help this person? So what resonated with me right now when you said that was, you would want your clients to be invested or committed in their own growth, which is tough sometimes when it's a big ask. It's a big ask, or it looks different for different people at different times. Because someone coming to you initially is a big step, right? They're saying, I want something, I need help, I see you as someone who can help me get there. It's an honor, right? To be in those positions. But then there is a dance, right? There's like, you can help someone only as much as they want to help themselves, and it's tough sometimes. Yeah, and another tough thing about that, just speaking specifically about helping people who are and taking that first step to talk to you about doing X, Y, or Z. You sometimes get the people who don't want to be questioned. They're like, I already know what I want to do. I've spent time figuring this out. I don't need you to question me anymore. You know what I mean? So there's this defense mechanism that you're working through, because it triggers them. There's maybe some self-doubt, or maybe some other stuff going on, and you don't know about that. I don't know about that, because I just started talking to you. I asked you to fill out this application, and you have a couple issues with the questions I asked, because you're thinking this is cut and dry. Like, I just want to train. This is going to get me to where I want to go. I want to say, I think that's what makes you really unique. Your work is really unique, because the average fitness professional is not interested in your emotional well-being as much as they want. Well, in fitness, there's also a big sales component, which is not great for the industry, just because people feel like you're trying to sell them something. Right. But outside of that, there's there's the physiological components. Like I want this number on the scale.
Right.
You're invested in their growth, and you want to know if you can transform someone's life, help them transform their lives. That's different than just a physical change. So that's powerful.
I think, I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Okay,
I think fitness professionals are invested as much as they can be. I think to be a fitness professional, there is a level of interest in someone's well-being for you to have even pursued that, or at least an interest in helping, right? So, personal trainers have to pay money to learn how to be a personal trainer, take a test, and for most certifications, you have to recertify every couple years. So it takes money and time to do that. So you have to want to help people to do that, because if not, you're wasting your time and your resources. How you go about doing it looks different. So of the many fitness professionals there are in the world currently, how I approach someone's journey is different than how Mark will approach someone's journey.
So even the verb journey is a different, that's awesome.
Right. It's a good word.
It's a great word.
Yeah, I think it gives a lot of space for things to be whatever that person needs it to be, because I don't want to call what you're going through something if it's not what it is,
Yeah.
So while you figure that out, I'll stay in my lane. And that staying in my lane is me identifying my scope of practice and respecting that I can't kind of walk outside those lines. Like there's boundaries, and I need to stay within the confines of the boundaries that I'm working in, because that's my responsibility to you.
Yeah, right.
And to myself too,
Right.
So when any person, I think, is starting to figure out, what's going to help them get through this mental health hurdle, and they're identifying fitness as a potential contributor to the resolution, yes, if you think you figured it out and you want someone to help you, they might just give you a plan and, you go execute it. But you might get the people who are like, are you sure? And I find that might offend some people, because it has. But also there are people who appreciate it because they're like, well, I guess I didn't think of it this way, So maybe being open is another thing that is very important if you are going to take that step. And I don't think you're not being open if you're taking that step. I think you have to, there's some level of vulnerability to even initiate, but there is going to be, a challenge of continuing to be vulnerable throughout that process. And that sometimes is a deterrent for people, and they don't realize it until they're in it, and it can sometimes become kind of contribute to the problems we haven't yet identified.
Right.
And
maybe like blind spots.
Right. Yeah, so those triggers are, I had good intentions, but I didn't know that I would be triggering something for you. So now you don't want to work with me, or maybe you just want to take a break because it's too much. So these are really real scenarios.
They really are, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I go through stuff like this. I don't know if you do in your fitness life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But sometimes I'm going through something. I'll like with my physical health, if I'm experiencing something that is hard, and I'm like, all right, let me take it to the gym and just kind of train through it. But then I'm in pain somewhere else. I'm like, oh, this is a terrible idea. I should never have done this. It's like that trial and error that we were talking about before. So yes. Is there anything else you want to leave our viewers with?
I think, I'm a big advocate for giving exercise a try, and trying to find what works for you. It could be a variety of, it could be a class, it can be an in-home training, it can be going to the gym and taking a Zumba class. I would encourage people to explore what is best for them, to incorporate it in their everyday experience, in their lifestyle. And then I would also encourage people to be open to counseling and to be open to therapy, that it's not necessarily indicative or a sign of a major issue in your life. It's just, and it's an added benefit. It could be a vitamin for you to be able to have an opportunity to kind of explore what's going on for you, your experience, and get feedback as well as have the opportunity to look at things that, like, your blind spots that you may not be aware of, that can come up out of nowhere, or triggers or past experiences or anxiety, depression, all these things that happen. So I think people are realizing now mental health is very real, and it happens to all of us. We can talk a little bit about cultural implications. How do you feel about that?
So I'm Puerto Rican. My mom is born and raised in the continental USA, New Jersey, and my dad was born in Puerto Rico. He now lives in New Jersey. He's been here for, I'm 30, so maybe 40 years. He doesn't think mental health is a thing.
That's not uncommon.
Yeah, he doesn't think that. And I have found that commonality with other friends of mine whose parents are also from Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America. And I don't know if it's because they think there's like a level of weakness associated with having a mental health struggle, or if there's just a lack of education. If you're not aware that something is a thing, then it's not a thing. It's impossible,
Yeah. I think it's a variety of things. I think culture is also how you were raised and how you were brought up. And I think men have strong, Latino men in particular. I've seen that with because my mother's Puerto Rican. I've seen that with her brother, with siblings and people in the family, right? It's you're taught at an early age you have to be strong, you have to be masculine, machismo.
Yeah. And
I think that plays a role in the psyche, because now you're not necessarily validated when you do show an emotion, so you can't show an emotion. And I think that plays out a lot in how men in particular, and Latino men in general, they sort of navigate their experiences through this. I feel this way, but it may turn into anger or it may turn into frustration, versus you're just really sad at this point in time. But it's tough because if they don't acknowledge it, right, it may not be the word mental health that they acknowledge, but maybe it's something else, right? Like, I'm feeling off,
right.
Or I'm feeling, or I've heard people say I'm feeling crazy right now, I'm feeling tripping, or I'm feeling, like something's not right. And those are all signs that they're just not feeling great at that moment. So sometimes we need to also be mindful of different ways people express their invitations.
Absolutely. Thank you. If you are interested in Mark's journey, if you want to send him a message, if you have questions, if you are just wanting to say hi, tell us where we can find you. You can find me on Instagram at MarkYourWorld. That's M-A-R-K, your, and world with an extra D at the end. I'll put it below. Some people misspell your, so it's a lot of verbiage there, but yeah. Find me on Instagram, and like you said, you can follow my journey. Follow his journey. Thanks for tuning in.